Hello. Today we'll explain the basic endgames in chess. Basic endgames of king, in this examples, the black king alone against white king and another piece. It can be the queen, the rook, two bishops, or a bishop and a knight. All the endgames will be without pawns. So it is impossible to mate a king in the center of the board, and we have to push him to the side, either to the H or A column, or the first or last row. So in this example, white begins, and if you see, the black king is can walk only in this rectangle because the white king denies him the possibility to move to the third row, and the white king prevents him from moving to the E column. So we are doing king E6 and king G4. King E5, again, he is restricted to these squares. And let's say king G5, queen G3. Now he is even more limited because he cannot go to the F column. He cannot stay on the G column. He has to go to the H. So let's say king H6, king F6, king H7, and now this is mate. It's very important not to make a stalemate. How can we make a stalemate? I will show you one example. Let's say we give a chess on let's say we give it, we are going to G5. The king is going to H8, and we are going to G6. This is a stalemate, and this we should avoid, of course, because now the king, the black king, is not in check. No one threatens him, but he cannot move. G8 and G7 and H7 are protected by the queen, and the king has nowhere to move. So this special case that the king is not threatened by a check, and he cannot move, is called stalemate, and the result is a draw. So this we should avoid. Let's do another example of the king and the rook versus a king. So let's put the king here, the rook here, and the black king will put on E3. Okay. Again, we try to move the black king from the center of the board to the last row or last column. So the second row is defended by the rook. He cannot go to the second row. And king D5 prevents him to go to those row in the fourth line. So let's say he returns to D3. Rook B3, and the king goes to C2, king C4, king D2, rook D3, king E2. Now he's restricted to those 8 squares. King C3, king F2, king D2 now is restricted to those 6 squares. King G2, king E2, now is restricted to only 4 squares. King G1, king F3, again, only 1, 2, 3 possible moves. king h1, king g3. Now only one possible square, and he's mated on d1. These are all technical endgames that you should master because it may occur in your own games. So now I'm moving to another endgame, a bit more complex, where we have a king, two bishops, and of course the black king. And we have the same goal to push him to the corner. Now it must be in the corner or a square very near the corner, otherwise it's impossible to mate it. Let's see what the two bishops do together. You see this diagonal. The black king cannot move to those squares because it's protected by the bishops, and also those squares are protected by the bishop, so he has to go back. King d6, king e4, king e7, rook c5. Of course, there are many possible moves, but the idea is the same. You have to push the black king to the border. So the white bishop prevents going to this diagonal, and the black to this diagonal, and the king prevents him to getting to the fifth row. King e6, no, sorry. King e6, h6, king e5, king h5, bishop e6. Now he cannot go to g4 because of the king. He cannot go to h4 because of the bishop. He has to get back. King f6, king h6, king f6. The king returns to h5, king f7. Again, both the bishops prevent him to continue, so he has to return to h6. Now bishop g4 prevents him to return to h5. So king goes to h7. Bishop f8 prevents him to return to h6. Going to h8. Bishop g7. And now the mate. This is the typical mate. It is not important if you will be as efficient as in this example. The important thing is not to overgo the 50th move, because we have a rule in chess that if for 50 moves no pawn advance, and here there is no pawn at all, so no pawn can advance. So if 50 moves pass and no pawn advances and no piece is taken, it's a draw. So we should do the mate with less than 50 moves. It's not a problem, it's just a matter of technique. I will show you another example of this two bishops endgame. A little bit different, but the same idea. I'm putting the bishops on different squares. And the white king on b3. So the black king is again in the center of the board. We have to push him to the side. And now, very important, I forgot to do it. I will let the black start so he can choose whatever he wants. And of course, he will try to get to the center of the board. Center of the board, e4, e5, e4, e5, d5, d4. This is the absolute center of the board. king c4, also the white brings the king to the center, king f5, king d4, pushing him from the center, king e6, bishop d5, king d7, bishop a5, king d6, bishop d6, preventing those squares, and he cannot return here. King e7, king e5, king d7, bishop a5. Now he must return to this side. Bishop e6, cannot return again to this side. King f8, king f6, king e8, bishop h3. The idea, it looks like a waste of time, and this is the whole idea of the move, because now black has to go to the right side. And bishop d7 prevents him from going back to e8. King g8, king g6, king f8, bishop b4. Now again he must go to the side. King g8, bishop e6, king h8, and bishop c3 is a mate. So we saw two examples of mating the black king with the two bishops. My advice is to practice this either with a stronger player than you that will try to defend as the black king, or if you have a chess program on the computer, try to put the initial an initial random position of the king and the bishops, or even the king and the rook or the queen, like in the previous endgame, and try to fight the computer the best as you can until you master the endgame, because it's a matter of technique. Another problem is that usually at the end of the game, you have only a few minutes to finish the game if you play with a clock. And it's important that you are sure of the technique, because otherwise to calculate everything, if you are not familiar with the endgame, is really difficult. So now I will show you the last endgame, the king, bishop, and knight against the king. It's not easy. You have to master the technique, and I will show you again. Now, you cannot push the king to any corner that you want. You have to push him to the right corner. What is the right corner? If the bishop is white, like in this example, you have to push him to the white corner, either h1 or a8. In the black corner, it's impossible to mate him. So, king b7, king d6, king b6, king d7, king c5, king e6, king d4, king d6, bishop c4, king e7, king e5, king d7, bishop d5, king e7, knight b6, king f8. Of course, the black wants to go to this corner. King f6. The bishop is preventing him to continue, and the king is preventing him from reaching the seventh row. So he has to return to e8. Bishop c4, again a waiting move. King d8, bishop b5, king c7, knight c4. Knight c4 prevents him to go to d6. So king d8, king e6, king c7, king e7, king c8, king d6, king b7, king d7, king b8, knight d6, king a7, king c7. We're approaching the corner, king a8, bishop c4, king a7. The bishop c4 move prevented him to continue to a6. Now check on c8, king a8, and finally the mate with the bishop. I will show you another example of the same mate, a little bit different, but the same idea. Again, black to start, and you see that the black king is very near the black corner, which, as we said, it's impossible to mate him on the black corner. So white has to move him either to h1 or to a8. Here, no, it's not possible to mate him. So knight g6, king a7, h7, king f6. Now we cannot return here. He must go to h6. Bishop g8, he cannot return again. King h6, h5, knight e5, king h6, knight c4, king h5, king g7, preventing him to return, king g4, a4, bishop h7, king g5, bishop g6, king f4, king h6, king g4, bishop c2, king f4, king h5, king f3, king g5, king e2, king f4, king e1, king e3, king f1. It cannot go to this side. Bishop e4, king e1, knight b2, preventing him to go to d1, king f1, knight d3, preventing him to go to e1, king g1, king f3, king h2, knight f4, again preventing him to go to h3, king g1, bishop d3, preventing him to go to f1, king h2, king f2. Now we must go to the corner. King g3, he must go to g1. Knight h3, he must go to the corner, and bishop e4. Again, it's mate. It's not easy to do it. You have to practice. You have to try to achieve this goal, either with a stronger player that try to defend as the black king, or using a computer that will try to defend. I hope that you enjoyed the end games. It's very important to master them, and I hope that you enjoyed this demonstration.